sun burned low over the endless plains, casting long shadows over Caleb Rowe's ranch. Years of hard labor had carved lines into his face and hardened his hands, but nothing could soften the ache in his chest. Since losing his wife to illness a decade ago, he'd lived alone, surrounded only by the lowing of cattle, the creak of barn doors, and the whisper of wind through dry grass. The townsfolk called him gruff, unyielding, and feared he had become untouchable, like the wild lands he worked. One morning, a letter arrived on a dust-streaked horse, tied with twine and stamped with the seal of a distant mail order agency. Caleb tore it open, finding a photograph of a woman he had never seen before. Dark hair, soft eyes, and a tentative smile that seemed fragile but determined. The letter read simply that she was unclaimed, overlooked by other men in the West. She offered herself not just as a wife, but as someone willing to work, to live, to endure. Caleb frowned. He had never believed in love letters from strangers, yet something in her eyes stirred a long-forgotten hope. By noon, a stagecoach clattered into his yard. He had gone to town to claim her, expecting a simple, transactional meeting. And yet, when she stepped down, dust-coating her simple dress and boots, he felt an unexpected pull. She was real, a live human. "Are you Caleb Rowe?" she asked, voice small but unwavering. "I am," he said, hand extended. "And you must Clara," she said, bowing slightly. I suppose you claimed me?" Caleb chuckled despite himself. "I did. Welcome to the ranch." The townsfolk stared as the male, order bride he had claimed walked with him to the cabin. Whispers followed them. No one wanted her. Why would he? Caleb ignored it. There was something about Clara, quiet, patient, kind, that seemed to melt the stone around his heart. That night, as they ate supper by firelight, she asked about his life, his cattle, his struggles. Caleb realized he had never shared his burdens with another soul, and in her quiet listening, in her gentle curiosity, he felt the first flicker of relief in years. If you're curious how this unlikely bride softened the life of a hardened rancher, hit like and subscribe. You won't believe the changes she brings. Clara settled into the ranch slowly, learning its rhythms, its chores, and its hardships. She fetched water, tended chickens, and worked alongside Caleb in the fields. At first, he kept his distance, wary of attachments. Life had taught him trust was dangerous. Yet her laughter, soft, melodic, unforced, began to fill corners of the cabin that had known only silence. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Clara handed him a cup of coffee. "You work too hard," she said, eyes watching him carefully. "I've survived this long," he replied, voice gruff. "Yes, but surviving doesn't mean living," she said gently. "You're alone, Caleb. Let me help." Her words struck him deeper than she knew. The loneliness that had been his companion for so long suddenly seemed heavier. Yet here was someone willing to shoulder a piece of it, simply by being present. He hesitated, then nodded slightly. That was enough for her, and enough for him to begin. Over weeks, small changes took root. She baked bread, repaired torn curtains, and talked to him in ways no one had. Caleb began to look forward to her presence. A simple smile, a question about his day, a shared silence by the fire. He found himself speaking of his past, his losses, even his fears. Each revelation brought a subtle shift in the rancher's hardened heart. Outside, the wind swept across the plains, yet inside the cabin, warmth grew. Clara wasn't just a bride, she was a balm. She asked nothing of him but his trust, and he found himself giving it, hesitant at first, then with growing certainty. One afternoon, a violent storm descended, threatening the livestock and tearing at the barns. Caleb and Clara worked together through wind and rain, securing gates, reinforcing fences, and calming frightened horses. Mud clung to their boots, and rain soaked their clothes, but neither complained. Instead, in those shared struggles, a bond formed stronger than any words could express. After the storm passed, they sat by the fire, exhausted, and for the first time, Caleb spoke of his late wife, of the emptiness he had carried. Clara listened without judgment, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," she whispered. That night, under the soft glow of lanterns, Caleb realized that his heart had softened, that he had allowed someone in after years of isolation. Clara wasn't just a helper or a bride. She was the light that broke through his loneliness, the hand that steadied him through life's harshest storms. By the following spring, the ranch had transformed almost as much as Caleb himself. Clara's presence had softened the hard edges of his life, filling the cabin with laughter, warmth, and a sense of home he hadn't felt in years. The scent of fresh bread mingled with the earthy aroma of the fields, and the animals seemed calmer, responding to the gentle way she moved among them. Caleb watched her from the porch, admiring the way her hands worked with purpose, the soft determination in her eyes, and the small smile that had become his favorite thing in the world. One morning, as the prairie sparkled with dew, Clara walked toward him carrying a basket of eggs. "You know," she said, brushing dirt from her hands and tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear, "I never thought anyone would want me, and yet here I am, part of this life." Caleb's weathered face softened as he stepped closer. "And you've changed mine, Clara. I was surviving, yes, but now I'm living. You've made this ranch a home, made me a man again." His voice, usually gruff, held a tenderness reserved for very few. They walked together along the fence line, sharing stories of past hardships and hopes for the future. Each word seemed to knit their hearts closer, bridging the loneliness they had both carried for so long. For the first time, Caleb allowed himself to imagine a future that was not just about survival, but about love, partnership, and shared dreams. As evening fell, the prairie was bathed in golden light. They stood hand in hand, listening to the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of the wind through tall grass. Caleb turned to her and smiled, the weight of years lifting from his shoulders. "No one believed in her," he said softly, "but she believed in me." Clara rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength and quiet warmth of a man who had learned to open his heart. "And I'll keep believing," she whispered, "as long as we have each other." The townsfolk eventually stopped whispering, learning to accept the woman they once ignored. And when Caleb and Clara finally stood together beneath the endless western sky, it felt as if the prairie itself celebrated the quiet miracle of their union. A life once defined by hardship had been transformed by trust, kindness, and love. In that moment, Caleb knew something he had never dared before. He had been hardened by the world. Yes! But with Clara, he had found not just companionship, but a home and the courage to love again.